You wake up in the morning, and before even fully opening your eyes, your hand is already reaching for your phone on the nightstand. You feel that familiar anxiety when you realize you're late to check the notifications that piled up overnight. Then, throughout the day, you notice you prefer replying to messages over having in-person conversations, that you feel more comfortable scrolling through social media than attending real social events, that your most meaningful interactions happen through screens. And then, in the silence of the night, a disturbing question echoes in your mind. Am I becoming antisocial? Am I distancing myself from people? This unease is not yours alone. It is shared by millions of individuals who are undergoing the same subtle yet profound transformation in their patterns of human connection and interaction. What you're experiencing is not a pathology or a character flaw. It's something far more extraordinary and meaningful. You are, consciously or unconsciously, participating in one of the greatest revolutions in the history of human consciousness. For decades, we have interpreted this shift in social patterns through a nostalgic and often alarmist lens. We talk about digital isolation, the death of real socialization, the epidemic of loneliness allegedly plaguing our era. Psychologists, sociologists, and cultural commentators have dedicated themselves to diagnosing this phenomenon as a disease of modernity, something that needs to be cured or reversed. But this perspective, while understandable, may be fundamentally mistaken. What appears to be a withdrawal from people may actually be a radical reconfiguration of how human consciousness organizes and expresses itself in the world. To truly understand what is happening to us, we need to expand our temporal perspective and examine how humanity has always evolved through major leaps in the organization of consciousness. Throughout our history as a species, we've gone through transformational moments that initially seemed to represent loss or deterioration, but later proved to be fundamental evolutionary advances. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies to the first agricultural settlements about 10,000 years ago was accompanied by dramatic changes in human socialization patterns. People who once lived in small, tightly integrated groups where everyone knew each other intimately and shared nearly all experiences, began living in larger and more complex communities where most everyday interactions became superficial and functional. Critics of that time, if they had existed, might have mourned the loss of tribal authenticity or the weakening of genuine community bonds. Centuries later, the invention of writing triggered an even deeper revolution in human consciousness. For the first time in history, human beings could communicate across time and space without being physically present. This ability fundamentally changed how we process information, build relationships, and understand our own identity. Plato, one of the first to document this transformation, expressed concerns remarkably similar to those we hear today about digital technology. In the dialogue Phaedrus, he warned that writing would weaken human memory and create an inferior form of knowledge based on external symbols rather than internalized wisdom through face-to-face dialogue. For Plato, increasing dependence on written words represented a dangerous move away from true human communication. What Plato couldn't foresee was that writing wouldn't eliminate oral dialogue, but instead create a new dimension of human consciousness, the ability to preserve and transmit ideas through texts, enabled the development of complex philosophies, sophisticated legal systems, rich literature, and eventually the entire conceptual framework that made modern civilization possible. The apparent loss of pure orality was in fact an extraordinary expansion of human communication and thought. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century sparked an even more radical transformation. Before Gutenberg, knowledge was primarily communal and oral. People learned through direct relationships with teachers, elders, and experienced members of their communities. Education was intensely social and interpersonal. With the democratization of books, something fundamental changed. For the first time in history, an individual could gain deep knowledge in solitude through silent reading. This practice, which we now consider natural and even essential for intellectual development, was viewed with suspicion and concern by many at the time. There were fears that solitary reading would produce antisocial individuals disconnected from communal wisdom and dangerously independent in their thinking. These concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Mass reading did indeed alter the structure of European societies, contributing to the development of modern individualism, Protestantism, scientific and political revolutions, and the entire cultural complex we now call modernity. Many traditional forms of authority and social organization were questioned or abandoned. But the end result wasn't the destruction of human society. It was its transformation into something incomparably more complex, diverse, and capable. Now, in the 21st century, we are undergoing a transformation of similar magnitude, perhaps even greater. The digital revolution is not only changing how we communicate, it is altering the very structure of human consciousness and our relationship with reality. When you feel like you are distancing yourself from people by preferring digital interactions, you may unconsciously be developing new cognitive and social capacities that are essential for navigating the emerging world. The first of these capacities is what we might call networked consciousness. For most of human history, our consciousness operated in a relatively linear and localized manner. We processed information sequentially, maintained relationships with a limited number of people physically close to us, and our identity was shaped mainly by our immediate environment. Digital technology is training us to operate very differently. Through social networks, messaging apps, collaborative platforms, and virtual environments, we are learning to maintain simultaneous relationships with hundreds or thousands of people, process multiple conversations and streams of information in parallel, and build our identity through interactions that transcend geographic and temporal boundaries. This ability is not trivial. It is a fundamental evolution in how the human brain processes social information. Recent neuroscience studies show that people who spend significant time in digital environments develop different patterns of brain activation compared to those who stick to face-to-face interactions. Areas related to multitasking, divided attention, and associative memory show greater activity and connectivity. These changes do not represent deterioration. They represent adaptation to an informational environment that demands new cognitive skills. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, do you recognize this transformation happening in your own mind? Those moments when you feel more comfortable expressing complex ideas in writing than in speech, or when you realize you can maintain emotionally meaningful connections with people you've never physically met? I know we often keep these observations to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of seeming disconnected or less human in a society that still primarily values in-person interaction. But your experiences are valid and likely shared by more people than you think. Share in the comments. I feel my consciousness expanding when. Your honesty may help others recognize the same transformation in their own lives, showing that we are not alone in this evolution of the human experience. The second emerging capacity is what we might call asynchronous intimacy. Traditionally, deep relationships required synchronized physical presence. Two people needed to be in the same place at the same time, giving exclusive attention to each other to develop meaningful emotional connections. Digital technology is teaching us that intimacy can transcend these limitations. Through text messages, emails, social media comments, video calls, and other forms of digital communication, we are developing the ability to create and maintain deep emotional bonds asynchronously and across time. This form of intimacy has unique characteristics that in many ways may be richer and more authentic than traditional face-to-face communication. In digital communication, we have time to reflect before responding, the opportunity to express complex thoughts more clearly, and the freedom to share vulnerable aspects of ourselves without the immediate awkwardness of physical presence. Many people find they can be more honest, more creative, and more deeply connected emotionally through digital means than in live conversations. This doesn't mean face-to-face communication is inferior or unnecessary. It means we are developing an expanded repertoire of human connection forms, each with its own advantages and specific applications. The apparent preference for digital that you may be feeling is not necessarily an escape from people. It may be a natural evolution toward forms of communication that better suit your temperament, your interests, and the complexities of the modern world. The third developing capacity is what we can call fluid identity. For most of human history, our identity was relatively fixed and determined by the physical context in which we were born. We were children of specific parents, members of certain communities, practitioners of particular professions, and these categories rigidly defined who we were. The digital age is offering us the opportunity to explore and develop multiple facets of our identity in a more fluid and experimental way. On social media, online games, niche forums, and other digital platforms, we can express different aspects of our personality, explore various interests, and connect with communities that might not exist in our immediate physical environment. This multiplicity is not fragmentation or inauthenticity. It's a more complete and diverse expression of who we truly are. Instead of being limited by the geographic and social circumstances of where we were born, we can discover and develop aspects of our personality that would remain dormant in more restrictive environments. The fourth emerging capacity is distributed metacognition. Traditionally, we thought in relative isolation, using only the resources of our individual minds. Digital technology is allowing us to think collaboratively and expansively, using external tools and networked connections as extensions of our own cognition. When you search for information online, participate in forum discussions, use apps to organize thoughts, or collaborate on shared documents, you are engaging in a form of intelligence that transcends the boundaries of your individual mind. This ability to think with machines and think in networks is not a replacement for our natural intelligence. It is an amplification and sophistication of it. Just as writing enabled us to preserve and manipulate complex ideas outside of biological memory, digital tools allow us to process information, solve problems, and generate insights in ways that would be impossible using only internal mental resources. These four emerging capacities form the foundation for a fundamentally new kind of human being. We are not becoming less social. We are becoming social in a different way. We are not moving away from people. We are developing more sophisticated and flexible ways to connect. The discomfort you may feel with traditional forms of socialization is not a deficit. It is a sign that your consciousness is adapting to possibilities that are not yet fully understood or accepted by broader society. But this transformation is not happening without significant challenges and risks. Like every evolution in human consciousness, the current leap involves real losses along with gains. Some traditional human capacities are atrophying, some forms of connection are becoming more difficult, and new types of psychological and social problems are emerging. It is crucial to acknowledge these risks without allowing them to obscure the fundamentally evolutionary nature of what is happening. One of the main risks is what we might call the superficialization of attention. Constant exposure to multiple and fragmented digital stimuli is training our brains to process information more quickly, but potentially less deeply. The ability to maintain prolonged focus on a single task or idea, to contemplate complex questions for extended periods, and to experience states of deep concentration may be diminishing. This shift has significant implications for our ability to develop expertise, to create deep works of art or literature, and to sustain relationships that require sustained attention and patience. Another major risk is the fragmentation of narrative coherence. Traditionally, we built our identity through relatively cohesive narratives about who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. The multiplicity of digital contexts and the fluidity of online interactions can make it difficult to maintain a coherent sense of self. Some people report feeling fragmented or confused about their true identity when transitioning between different platforms and online communities. This fragmentation may contribute to anxiety, depression, and a general sense of existential disconnection. A third risk is what we might call atrophy of physical intimacy. While we are developing sophisticated forms of digital intimacy, we may be losing some capacities related to physical presence, prolonged eye contact, reading subtle body language, and emotional synchronization that occurs when two nervous systems meet in the same physical space. These capacities, developed over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, play an important role in our psychological well-being and may not be fully replaceable by digital alternatives. Acknowledging these risks should not lead us back to a nostalgic rejection of technology, but rather to a more conscious and intentional approach to how we navigate this transformation. The goal is not to preserve all traditional forms of being human intact, but to consciously integrate the most valuable aspects of the past with the emerging possibilities of the future. This requires developing what we might call cognitive bilingualism, the ability to operate fluently in both traditional and digital modes of consciousness, using each appropriately for different contexts and goals. Just as a bilingual person can switch languages depending on the situation, a cognitively bilingual person can switch between focused and distributed attention, between synchronous and asynchronous communication, between cohesive identity and fluid identity, depending on the circumstances. Developing this cognitive bilingualism requires deliberate practice and self-awareness. It means creating intentional spaces for deep attention experiences, such as meditation, prolonged reading, or face-to-face conversations without distractions. It means cultivating relationships that require physical presence and synchronized vulnerability. It means maintaining practices that connect you with your body, with nature, and with slower rhythms of experience. At the same time, it means fully embracing digital possibilities without guilt or resistance, developing fluency in the new forms of communication, thinking, and connection that technology makes possible. The key to navigating this transformation successfully is not choosing between the old and the new way of being human, but developing the wisdom to integrate both harmoniously and consciously. This means recognizing that the discomfort you feel with certain traditional forms of socialization may be a legitimate sign that these forms are not suitable for who you are becoming, without completely discarding their potential value in other contexts. It also means understanding that what you are experiencing as isolation or distancing from people may be in part a necessary period of incubation and development of new capacities. Just as a caterpillar needs time in the cocoon before emerging as a butterfly, you may need periods of apparent social withdrawal to integrate and develop the new forms of consciousness that are emerging in you. This process is not pathological, it is evolutionary. At the same time, it is important to distinguish between creative and productive isolation, which serves the development of new capacities, and defensive and regressive isolation, which arises from fear, trauma, or social inadequacy. The former is characterized by a sense of growth, discovery, and possibility, even when uncomfortable. The latter is characterized by feelings of emptiness, despair, and existential disconnection. Learning to make this distinction is crucial to navigating this transformation in a healthy way. One of the deepest implications of this evolution of consciousness is that we are collectively creating an entirely new form of civilization. It is not just about using new tools to do the same things we have always done. It is about developing new capacities that make possible social, cultural, and economic forms of organization that were previously unthinkable. Future generations may look back on our time as the moment when humanity transitioned from a planetary species to a truly cosmic species, capable of connecting consciousness across any distance and thinking collectively on scales that transcend traditional biological limitations. This perspective should not be a reason for arrogance or complacency. Evolutionary transitions are always risky, and there is no guarantee that our species will successfully navigate the emerging challenges. Climate change, political instability, growing inequality, and the very risks associated with accelerated technological development create significant uncertainties about our future. But understanding that we are in the midst of an evolutionary transformation, rather than merely a social decline, can give us the conceptual tools and courage needed to face these challenges more effectively. If you've been feeling out of sync with traditional forms of socialization, if you've preferred digital interactions over face-to-face encounters, if you felt that your mind works differently than it used to, consider the possibility that you are not becoming antisocial or problematic. You may be unconsciously participating in one of the most significant transformations in the history of human consciousness. Your sensitivity to the limitations of traditional forms of communication may be a sign that you are developing capacities that are essential for the future of our species. This does not mean that you must completely abandon traditional forms of human connection or isolate yourself in a purely digital world. It means that you can embrace your emerging preferences without guilt, while also consciously cultivating the traditional capacities that remain valuable. It means you can see yourself as a pioneer in uncharted territory, rather than as someone failing to adapt to the established world. If these reflections touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. The history of human consciousness is the story of evolutionary leaps that initially seemed like losses or deteriorations, but later turned out to be extraordinary expansions of our possibilities as a species. The present moment may be the greatest of these leaps, a transformation that decades or centuries in the future will be seen as the moment when humanity learned to think and connect in ways that completely transcend the limitations that previously defined our experience. You are not distancing yourself from people. You are preparing, along with millions of others, to connect with them in ways we are only just beginning to imagine.
I love to consider myself a storyteller. As an actor and a filmmaker, it's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yes.
this is the this is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth.
Would you regard yourself as an optimist or a pessimist with how much history you consume and with how you look at the development of the world?
I'll be a realist. I'll tell you the main question.
Yeah,
The
okay.
really kind of most fun